It's no longer necessary to try to infer or deduce how global governance is going to come to us. Global redistribution of wealth and a global control is now being presented as it's never been presented before. Never more overtly, never more in the open than it is being done this year with climate change. Now, of course, these people tried 6 years ago at the Copenhagen summit, and they failed. And they've been working on this agenda ever since. So let's take a look at the Earth Statement, and we're going to talk about who this comes from. It says, this is the year of opportunity for a sustainable future. They say 2015 is a critical year for humanity. Our civilization has never faced such existential risks as we are now faced with. And I agree with that, but I disagree that the risk is coming from man-made global warming. It's coming from global governance. But this is how they're going to bring it to us. I've been plotting this for the last 6 years. They say 3 times this year. World leaders will meet to set the course for decades to come. In July 2015, heads of state meet to discuss financing for development. In September 2015, the UN Sustainable Development Goals will be adopted, and they were. We'll talk about those later. In December 2015, which is coming up, 1 month, nations negotiate a new global climate agreement. Decisions made in this single year will be the legacy of our generation. How true. And yet, most people don't realize what the purpose of this is or how it is coming to us. It'll probably be enacted just like the Trans-Pacific Partnership by executive decree, pretty much. That's what they've done with the fast tracking of treaties. It'll probably be done during the holiday season so that people don't really look at this. But let's take a look at where this Earth Statement comes from and the man at the center. Look at this picture of the Earth League. This is from an article in May of this year. A call for science-based action. If you look at that picture, you will see Prince Charles at the center. But he's not the man in the center. The man who is really in the center of this is the man that's off to his right. John Schellenhuber, the German scientist. This man is essentially the Henry Kissinger or the Zbigniew Brzezinski of this movement. He is the guy behind all of this. He's put this out. He was at the core of all of the talking points 6 years ago. And now we see this year he has surfaced not as being behind Prince Charles, but really being behind the Pope and behind the Pope's encyclical earlier this summer to push global governance and now redistribution of wealth using government, global government. That's what they're coming at us with in this, this upcoming conference. Pope Francis appointed a population control extremist to the Vatican Post. And this is, again, going back to July. This is the Breitbart article on him. It's nothing but a twist from 2009. It's the same agenda, the same Schellenhuber. This is a guy who is now behind the Pope and not Prince Charles. They need a kinder, gentler face than Prince Charles to sell this, and they need to sell it on a moral authority. But look at what they were selling. This guy, of course, has been appointed to the Pontifical Academy of Science. He was a key writer of this encyclical. He was also one of the 4 official presenters. But back in 2009, at that Copenhagen climate conference that we just talked about, the one that failed to get global governance, he said that we had only the capacity to carry 1 billion people on this planet. So this guy is a radical depopulationist. How are they going to sell a moral agenda? Well, of course, you got to get rid of these people somehow. I thought it was interesting that just this last week, as China got rid of its one-child policy, we had a Boston professor, I mean, where else would they come from? Sarah Conley saying that we need a one-world child policy. And of course, that's what's ultimately going to happen if you pursue a policy of depopulation. That is what these people are after. That is what the Pope has embraced, a one-child policy. And listen to the way she puts this. She says, even having 2 children, the replacement value for the population, as the new Chinese policy allows, is likely to be too many children. By the time the birth rate stabilizes, the global population will be at unsustainable, that's their favorite word, unsustainable, or it is sustainable, unsustainable level, so we don't have a right to so many children. That's what happens when you say that you embrace this Malthusian view of the world, this view of Gaia theory that looks at humans as a virus that's killing the planet. But that's coming from Schellenhuber, the guy who wrote the encyclical for the Pope, the guy who presented the encyclical for the Pope, the guy who is head of his scientific advisory council, the guy who has created all the talking points, the 2% levels, talking about that we are now at the tipping point. But of course, there's another aspect to what Schellenhuber has been pushing, and that is world government. Look at this Catholic publication here, Vox Cantoris. They were concerned about the fact that the Pope was moving towards pushing a world governance. Here's what Schellenhuber talks about, and here's what they had a problem with, because they're Catholics. They want to see the Catholic Church embracing what they believe is the mission of the Catholic Church and not selling a materialistic world government. They say Schellenhuber wishes to influence Canadian Parliament. This guy is in Canada. He says he wants to see a certain percentage of national parliamentary seats earmarked for global ombuds people. And of course, the term is ombudsman, but that's, I guess, not politically correct enough for Schellenhuber. And this is what Schellenhuber said. He said, let me conclude with a daydream about those key institutions that could bring about a sophisticated version of the conventional world government notion. World government notion. Global, and then he inserts the word democracy. There's not going to be any democracy in this. But he says global, this one world government, might be organized around three core activities: an Earth Constitution, a global council, a planetary court. I can't discuss these institutions in any detail here. Well, that was 6 years ago. That was at Copenhagen. Now we can see what they're going to do. We have seen the Vatican now calling for a world government, and it is not an inference. It is not anything that we have to imply from this. This is now being explicitly stated. Listen to what the Vatican said. This Pope, these measures ought to be conceived as some of the first steps in view of a public authority with universal jurisdiction. That's world government, folks. As a first stage in a longer effort by the global community to steer its institutions towards achieving the common good. He is selling global governance, global socialism. And he goes on to clarify this. He says the primacy of politics is over the economy and finance. Understand that what he's talking about here is politics over economy, politics over finance, politics over private property, politics over individual rights. That is essentially what he's talking about when he's pushing global socialist world government. Now, the actual agreement, I give credit to the New American for discovering this. This was on October 31st. This is something that came out on Saturday. Stealth agenda, new UN tribunal to judge U.S. for climate debt. And the only thing I disagree with is that it's a stealth agenda. It's not a stealth agenda except to the people who refuse to listen to what's going on. The people who won't pay attention, who are preoccupied with other issues. They point out the official draft text of the climate treaty for the soon-to-start UN climate summit in Paris, that's the one starting in less than a month, proposes to establish a global Supreme Court. There you go. Now we can see how this is going to break down. That would rule on issues like climate justice, climate finance, technology transfers, climate debt. Let me read to you some of the issues from this. Now, this is the actual draft